Welcome to the Sisters in Crime Writers Podcast. Everyone has a unique writing journey, so join us for conversations about those journeys from the writers themselves. This is Julie Henricus, the Executive Director of Sisters in Crime, and I'm really delighted to welcome Susan Van Kirk to the podcast this week. Susan is an Illinois author. She was educated at Knox College and the University of Illinois. She's an author of 5 endurance mysteries, beginning with 3 May Keep a Secret. Her standalone mystery, A Death at Tippitt Pond, was followed by the Art Center mysteries, Death in a Pale Hue, Death in a Bygone Hue, and Death in a Ghostly Hue from Level Best Books. Her current work in progress is Fabric of Lies. She's a member of MWA and past president of the Guppy Chapter of Sisters in Crime. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I was really looking forward to this in the depths of winter in the Midwest.
Gives us both something to look forward to. I'm going to start where I always start, and we have a lot to talk about, but let's start with, when did you say to yourself, I want to write a novel?
Well, let's see. Probably about 2006.
Okay.
But the first book I wrote was not exactly a novel. It was a book of short stories. It came out in 2010, so it took me a while to write it, but I was still working at that point.
Yeah. So had you been writing short stories for a while?
No, not at all. It's got a kind of a strange story how I came to writing mysteries. I was teaching high school English. I went to University of Illinois for 3 summers to get a master's degree, and I was 50 when I got it. So while I was at University of Illinois, one of my professors wrote on one of my papers, "You know, you tell really interesting stories. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I thought, no, I have never thought about writing a book. Are you kidding? All I do is grade papers morning, noon, and night. So I came back home. I got the master's degree, and I thought, well, let's see what I could do with this master's degree. Maybe I could become a consultant to textbook companies. So I sent out a whole lot of resumes, got heard nothing from anyone except a very small company in Nebraska that produced Cliff Notes.
Oh.
Now, I had spent my entire teaching career in English trying to keep my students from using Cliff Notes. But I knew all those classic books of literature, and they needed somebody right away to do an upgrade of their book about the Scarlet Letter, which was one of my favorite books. So I said, this is kind of a moral problem here. I don't know if I can do this because, these are Cliff's Notes, and I just am not sure I can do that. So the guy named Greg Tubach that was trying to recruit me said, well, it would only take you about 6 weeks, and we would pay you this amount of money. And I went, whoa, where do I sign? Because I had 2 kids in college at that point. I was a single parent, and, teaching salaries are not much. So this was just a whole new world to me. And the interesting thing about it was that I ended up writing 7 or 8 of these, and I learned how to use software with tracking. I'd never done that before. I didn't know anything about it. But that put me in a nice position then later to work with editors on books. So I moved over to the college, Monmouth College, and taught there. And one of my students in an education class said, that story you told us about teaching at the high school, this was at the end of the semester, he said, you should write that story down. People that want to teach should read that. It's very inspiring. And it was a story that was set during the Vietnam War and something that happened to one of my students. So I thought, well, I've not written really stories. I've written Cliff Notes. That's not the same thing. But I thought, okay, I'll try that. And that summer, I wrote a short story about this experience. Now, telling a story and writing it are 2 different things. But I sent it off to Teacher Magazine And 2 weeks later, I got an email from them saying, we want to publish your story. And I thought, wow, it can't be this easy, can it? And of course, it wasn't after that. But it was a wonderful thing. And they put it up on their website and had me do a recording of it, reading it.
Oh.
And all of a sudden, really magical things began to happen. I heard from students that I had not heard of in years, and people all over the country, and people that were first-year teachers that read my book or read my story and just were really inspired by it. So I thought, this is kind of fun. So I decided that when I retired, well, actually before I retired, I decided I would write a book of stories about my teaching life. And I did. I called it The Education of a Teacher, Including Dirty Books and Pointed Looks. And I self-published it. Didn't know much about that at the time, but it really did well. I talked about it at the American Library Association. I talked about it at the National Conference of the National Council of Teachers of English. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed it. So I thought, when I retire, I am going to write mysteries because I love mysteries.
Okay.
And they always say, write what you would like to read.
Yeah.
So I did. I decided I would write mysteries, and I took a year and just read everything I could read about writing books, writing mysteries, writing dialogue. I mean, I'd been an English teacher, but I really hadn't written books other than the short stories. So that's how I ended up becoming a mystery writer. Kind of crazy.
Well, it's a great story. I mean, as an English teacher, you were used to narrative structure and difference and themes. Like, you had built up that skill, and writing Cliff Notes also, you had to pare it down in order to give people what the book was about.
Absolutely. And that was a great experience too, because I worked with more than one editor on each of those, and you began to realize that it was a business.
Yeah.
And that the things that they said to you about your writing were not personal. And that was a very good lesson for me, because I'd never had anybody make judgments about my writing before. So it was great.
And that's a hard thing. You'd been a teacher, so you'd been doing that with students, but it's getting that feedback, especially for a gig where, you're being paid to do it. I mean, it's clear, like, this is a right for hire, so that you're less precious about it. It's like, I love this book and I want people to get what they need out of this Cliff Notes, but, my soul isn't in this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that way when you started writing?
It took me 15 years to get my first book published, and I shouldn't have spent so long on it. But I learned, and I think we all have to learn, and this is part of the conversation. First of all, what you said, it's a business, is very important. We need to talk about that. But also the writing and building your skills it's a craft that you aspire to master, but you really don't ever, because you constantly push yourself.
That's true. You're absolutely right. And the funny thing about that is, right now I am actually re-editing that first book I ever wrote about teaching. And I'm going to put it out in a second edition. And my writing now is so different than my writing was back then in 2010, when I was just getting started. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know so many things that I know now. I mean, there's one chapter where I use the word "and" 156 times.
Well, we all have our words, but "and" is not usually, we have the justs and the so's and the this, but "and" is not usually the, wow, that's
Just thinking about your comment about the fact that, as time goes by, you learn a lot more about the business, you learn a lot more about writing, you work on your craft, and yes, you get better, hopefully, and I think I did.
Well, and that's one of the great things about indie publishing is that you can revisit something as you are and say, all right, we're gonna look at this again. And also, I'm that much older. I've got more life experience to throw in here. I can do things, and you can, it sounds like a second version, second edition of this book will be well received as well.
Yeah, it was pretty funny when I started reading it again. It's been 16 years since I wrote that book. My gosh.
I know. It flies. I mean, well, for some people, maybe not as much, but when the older you get. And do they even make Cliff Notes anymore?
They do, but they're all online.
Okay.
And so since you're not actually buying them, they're not paying people as much to write them. And I'll be honest, that was what I was looking for at the time, was another income line, because I had 2 kids in college, like I said, and a third one coming up.
Yeah, no, and I will be honest, I may have bought a Cliff Note or 2 in my college career.
I think it actually gave me some pretty good street cred with my college students to mention to them that I had written notes.
Yeah. So you always loved reading mysteries.
Yes.
And that was what you sort of, you said, okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to write mysteries. And the point you made is so well taken, that you really need to love what you're writing.
Yes.
There are other genres. There are many genres that, people, I'll write this because you make a ton of money or it sells well,
Sure.
But unless you love it, it's not, you got to, or like it a lot, in order to respect the readers. I mean, it's like you can spend so much time on this book. You better love it.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the things I've learned about writing is that people can tell if you love what you're doing.
Yeah.
I used to tell my students that you can see a lot about the author between the lines. And I see the same thing with my own writing. And you can tell if that author really loves what they're doing.
Yeah. Now, you've written both series and standalones.
I have one standalone. Yeah.
Okay. So with a standalone, you got to contain it all in the book. In a series, usually you've got 2 or 3 books, that you can arc a story, you can keep telling subplots, and you can get a character, you can play a lot and world build a lot. But in a standalone, you've got to do all the world building up front and make it so that people can jump in, follow it, and then the characters are done. Do you have how was that experience going from one to another? And did you enjoy the process of a standalone?
Yes, I did. I wrote that kind of in the middle of my endurance series. And I really loved it because there's a lot of history in it, of the area in which I live. And I was a history major in college, believe it or not an English major. So it gave me an opportunity to put a lot of history into that story. And it was fun because I started it in New York City. I haven't been to New York City since, 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to do a lot of research, look at a lot of videos. It was a lot of fun doing that. But I also was aware that everything had to be done from the beginning to the end of the book, and that was it. There had to be an ending that would finish it. And so it was very different than writing a series. You're right about that.
And would you classify it as a mystery, as a suspense? What was your standalone?
It's a mystery. I wouldn't call it really historical fiction, but it's the story of a woman who lives in New York City. Her name's Beth Russell, and she does a dream job for someone like you or me. She's a researcher for writers. And she loves what she does, but one day she's in the New York City Public Library, and this man comes up and starts talking to her and explains to her that he's a private eye, that he was hired by this family back in a small town in Illinois, that they're looking for the person that is the inheritor of a pretty substantial fortune. And he thinks that she's the one. And she thinks he's crazy. But, she grew up in New York in a family. She was an only child. She knew her parents. What is going on here? But eventually she does go back because she's curious. And she wants to see what's going on here. And when she gets back there, sure enough, her DNA says she's the one. And now there is a whole new mystery on her hands because her mother has dementia, so she can't really tell her much. Her father's died. How is she going to find out how this happened? And what's more, if this family really is her family, then the woman that was her mother was murdered at Tippitt Pond. And the person who was her father, perhaps, was the murderer. And there were 6 people there that day, and they seemed to be hiding a lot of secrets.
So I can see why that would be a self-contained story. I also love hearing writers talk about these worlds that they've created. Was this story inspired by how did you come up with the idea?
Oh gosh. This one totally came out of nowhere. I mean, there's nothing in it that most of my other books have something in them that have something to do with me or with my life. And even if the readers don't know that, that's kind of where the idea came from. But this book just came out of the blue. And I had thought that if I were going to make it into a series, this young woman, Beth Russell, is also an amateur genealogist. And she would want to go back and see the different people that came ahead of her in life. And if I were going to make it a series, I would choose a person from each of those time periods, like the 20s or World War II or whatever, and have her investigate their lives. But I ended up not doing that because I had other roads to travel, and who knows, maybe I'll get back to that sometime.
Yeah, no, I can see that it's got so many possibilities. So what's your process like when you're writing a series or your standalones with these ideas? Do you plot it? Do you just how do you know when you've got enough to write a book? Does that make sense? They're ideas. We all have ideas
Sure.
float around.
Right.
If a writer is just staring into the ground, into the air, it's because something's in their brain. But you've got to get the gravitational pull of worlds and characters and some kind of plot that makes you say, this can be a book.
Sure. Let me go to the last book I wrote in the Endurance series, and it actually is not my work in progress. It's actually out, and it's called Fabric of Lies. So I started thinking about possibilities for that book because at the end of the previous book, the 2 main characters got engaged. And then I had to decide, all right, are they married in this next book, or are they going to get married? Or I didn't want to do one of those mysteries where they're going to get married and one of them doesn't show up because they've been kidnapped or something, nothing like that. So I thought, okay, let's have them married. And now I've got to figure out what their relationship is, because in the rest of the series, Grace, the main character, has always told the whole story. But now we've got Jeff as a husband. So what do I do with him? And on top of that, the detective in town, T.J. Sweeney, is a very close friend of Grace's, and most of the earlier books have been about the 2 of them. So now that Grace is married, what do I do with T.J. Sweeney? So I had a lot of questions to answer. And before I can ever write a book, I have to answer a lot of questions. Otherwise, as you know, I can paint myself into a corner and not be able to get out. So I do an awful lot of thinking before I start writing. And in this particular case, I had an idea that I wanted to go back and show my readers Grace's first marriage. She had an earlier husband named Roger, but we'd never met him because he died before the series began.
Mm-hmm.
So if I write about the present day, but something that happened in the past, I could do maybe a couple of chapters from earlier when this thing happened, and the readers could meet Roger for the first time ever, even though I'm 6 books into the series. So I thought, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So I thought, all right, now what am I going to do to make that happen? Well, it turns out that 30 years earlier, Grace, who was married to Roger then, were living next door to a couple that had a little boy. They moved in and they became great friends back in the late 70s. And one night, that couple disappeared, just disappeared off the face of the earth. And the little boy at the time was in the hospital. He had pneumonia. And now in the present day, he survived and comes back to town and wants to find out what happened to his parents. So that was kind of my idea, get started with. But then I also wanted a subplot. And I thought about, well, Jeff Maitland, who's never had a really big part until now, he's the editor of the local newspaper. And I would like to say something about newspaper deserts in this country, because both of our local papers are gone. I mean, they were bought up by Gatehouse, and they are no longer really. I mean, they're being published, but they aren't local papers anymore. And it totally changes the culture of a small town to not have a newspaper.
Absolutely.
So, besides the disappearance, my subplot's going to be about Jeff and a hedge fund coming after his newspaper. So that's what I thought about, and that's what I ended up writing in Fabric of Lies. But like I said, you really have to do a lot of thinking so that you won't write yourself into a corner, and that's what I did. I had thought about finishing that series after book 3, because then I started those 3 Art Center mysteries for Level Best Books. And I thought, okay, I'll do those 3 books, and then I'll think about whether I want to go back to the other series or not. Well, I did. So it's strange, like you said, when it comes to writing a series, my endurance mysteries, I just started with the first book. I had no idea if I could even get it published. And I didn't know that much about arcs for an entire series. So each of those books has just had its own kind of arc, but they all fit together. But then when I went to Level Best Books, I got a 3-book contract, and I had to tell them what was going to be in each book. I thought, oh my gosh, I've never done that before. How am I ever going to do that, come up with 3 ideas? Well, I did. And it was a wonderful experience because I figured out how to do an arc that would go through that whole series. And that was totally different than writing those endurance mysteries one at a time. So it's been kind of interesting to me to see the difference in having a series that you plan out ahead completely and one that you just keep writing.
So, and now that you're back with the endurance series, are you thinking 2 or 3 books ahead, or, in arcs, or are you still looking at them as self-contained standalones that are obviously interrelated with what happened before?
Right now, I think I'm still kind of looking at them as individual books, and we'll see what happens. If I were to write another series, because my Art Center series are done, that's the 3-book series. If I were to think about writing another series, I think I would do what I did with Level Best Books, which is come up with maybe a trilogy of books that all are connected very well. But with my endurance mysteries, I think I'll probably just continue to write them one at a time and see what tickles my fancy.
Yeah, so when you talk about thinking through the book, do you really plot it like scene by scene, or do you have sort of tent poles that you're writing towards? Like, I know these 6 things are going to happen in this book, and I know this is what I want to happen in the middle, and I'm just going to figure out how to make them happen. Or are you a scene, you plot it and then you write it?
Well, I am a plotter, but not every detail. I do. In fact, I use that very word you used, tent posts. When I sit down and start thinking about where it's going to go, I come up with 3 or 4 or 5 of those tent posts and write between each of them. So I know the really big things that are going to happen. And this Fabric of Lies has a huge twist right in the middle that you never see coming. In fact, one of my my beta reader said, I am so angry that you did that. But that was one of the tent posts I was working on. So then when I start to write, I know what I'm writing toward, but I don't necessarily figure out every single detail between those tent posts. And things change considerably as I write. Now, when I first started, I was much more of a plotter because I wasn't quite sure. But now I have enough confidence that I can do it that way with those tent posts.
Yeah. And are you a daily writer when you're, setting deadlines for yourself, or do you, how do you manage your writing time?
I usually try to write in the afternoon. It's not necessarily every single day. I have right now still some involvement with the Arts Center downtown. I'm the president of their board, so I do have some committee meetings and things like that I have to write around. But mostly, no, I write in the afternoons. I'm not a morning person at all. So, and I don't write every single day, but I write most days when I'm writing a book because it's constantly on my mind.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. When you're writing a book, are you constantly thinking about it?
Absolutely. Wait, but that's also when you're writing, this is part of why having a writing routine is helpful, because if you interrupt it being in your mind all the time, your imagination has to catch up. And the fact that it's in your mind all the time means it's something can show up that's magic and it's going to help you figure stuff out.
Yes, you're right.
Right?
Yeah. And I do notice that when I'm writing, I do a lot more dreaming at night.
Yes.
And I think it's because that creative side of my brain is being overwhelmed.
And now you've indie published and you've also had a publisher. So two different journeys there. When you're indie published, talk about the business. You're also the publisher, so you're taking care of all the business yourself.
Yes.
When you've got a publisher, depending on the size of the publisher, they'll take on different tasks. But, usually there's editing and copy editing and they'll get it printed for you and things like that. So right. It's two different journeys, but it's helpful to think of the business side all the time. Do you prefer the control of indie, or do you, tell me about your publishing journey and how you've made that all work?
Well, I would not say that I'll never have another publisher. I would say that somewhere down the line I may, but right now I'm concentrating a little bit more on self-publishing, particularly with this endurance series. I actually have had several publishers. I began with 5 Star, and they published my first 2 mysteries in the endurance series, and then they closed their mysteries. So then I had an orphan series, and nobody else wanted to pick it up. So I decided, okay, I'll figure out how to self-publish it. And that's what I did. With Level Best Books, they did these 3 books, and we certainly knew ahead of time with the contract and everything that there were going to be 3 books. And at that point, I had an agent. So that's how I ended up getting that contract. In between, I did Death at Tippitt Pond with Encircle Publications, and Harlequin has published all of my endurance mysteries in mass market paperbacks. So I've had a lot of experiences with publishers. Some have been, let's say, more pleasant than others, but now I'm to the point where I'm going to be 80 years old this year, and I'm thinking I don't want to make this too complicated for my children. And the more publishers I have, the more complicated it gets. So I'm kind of moving toward doing the self-publishing, I think, because I have a system for doing it. It works really well. And as you said, I have more control over when the book comes out and what has to be done by when. And I have a lot of self-discipline, so I can do that.
You just brought up a lot of great points, and one of them is, having, and nobody likes to talk about this, but having a literary executor named who can take care of this, or, if there are royalties coming in, they get the royalties. Things like the Anthropic settlement, which is, a lot of books were pirated and used by Anthropic for training, and there's a settlement there. So literary executors would also file for authors who are passed on, but their book is there. So again, none of us like to talk about this, but that's such a gift to your family to say, no, this is a business and you may get a dinner out of this every 6 months. So let's make sure you do.
Well, I do have kind of a secret in my background there because my older son is my estate executor, but his wife is an attorney who does creative property, copyright, that kind of legal work. And she's at a huge firm. So if there were problems, I think she could probably straighten them out.
That's
I encourage my children to marry well.
So you have had quite the publishing journey when you're talking about all these things, 5 stars. So for folks listening, when a series is orphaned, it's because a publisher goes out of business, or if an editor leaves, sometimes your series gets orphaned as well, because they may assign another editor, but it's not, it doesn't always bode well for the future of the series.
So true. Deborah Goldstein and I both kind of were orphaned in that situation, and we both have cried deep tears with each other over that. Because, that was when I was first starting, and I thought, oh my gosh, so what do I do now? I have this series and I have a lot of readers, but nobody wants it.
It's really, really challenging. And how great is it that indie publishing, if you can get the rights back, is an option now for folks to publish their backlist and then be able to get it back out there. And especially if it's got readers, they want another book.
Right. Yeah. Believe me, I just finished one and they're already wanting to know when the next one's coming out.
So how long do you usually take to write a book?
Normally, I would say about 5 to 6 months. Now, the reason this last book, Fabric of Lies, was supposed to be out last March, didn't come out until November, but it's because I'm president of the art center downtown and our executive director left right as I became president. Oh. So last year was kind of a lost year. I spent 6 months being the executive director of a 501c nonprofit. And don't ask me what I know about nonprofits and legalities and everything, but yeah, I spent 6 months doing that, and then we finally found somebody part-time to help. But basically at 79, I was going to work every day, and I was on my feet every day, and it was not an easy year, and I sure wasn't getting any writing done.
Yeah.
But Fabric of Lies, I finally got finished, so I got it out in November. Otherwise, it would have been out so much earlier. But I don't regret that. It was a good thing to do. It was the right thing to do, and we now have a full-time executive director, and I'm starting January 1st. I'm retired for the 3rd time.
Well, Susan, this isn't your first time being of service. In your bio, we mentioned that you were the president of the Guppies. So the Guppies, for folks who don't know, originally was the Great Unpublished, is the idea. It's an online Sisters in Crime chapter. It's a very large chapter, closing in on 1,000 members, I think.
Yes, in fact, there were over 1,000 during the last part of my presidency there.
Yeah, so. People join when you're first starting out. First of all, the minute you say to yourself, I want to write a book, you should join a writing organization. And of course, I'm going to be here to pitch Sisters in Crime because we've got tools for you no matter where you are in your writing journey. But the Guppies are an unbelievable resource for folks just starting out because they've got all kinds of classes they offer. They've got all kinds of listservs, and they've got people who stay on to answer questions and to mentor. I mean, it's just an unbelievably helpful community as you're figuring stuff out. And you really need community in order to publish. But it's not a small thing being the president of the Guppy. And it's a 2-year term. So which I actually think 2-year terms are great because you sort of learn the first year and then the second year you can actually implement with greater ease. But it's not a small thing. And so you did that as well. And that was fairly recently as well in the last 5 years.
Yes. Right. I was on their steering committee for 5, 6, 7 years. And I was doing membership the first 4 years. And then the president stepped down in the middle of her term for a number of reasons. And so they asked me to take over her second year, which I did. And then I ran for 1 2-year term myself. So yes, I know what you mean. And you're right. It is not an easy job, but I met so many people that are in the writing business, and it is such a wonderful resource. And let me put a few words in too for Sisters in Crime, because I think I joined Sisters in Crime maybe 2014, 2015, somewhere in there. And at that point, I didn't really have a writing community at all. And that was absolutely wonderful because I met so many people. I got my editor through Sisters in Crime, Lourdes Bernard. She's my editor of all my books. And I made connections so I could find a formatter and a cover artist. And so it really helped set up my independent publishing. But gosh, I met so many wonderful people, and I went to Malice Domestic a couple of times, and that's a big writing conference. And that was absolutely sensational. I cannot say enough about Sisters in Crime and about the Guppy Chapter, because the Guppy Chapter, oh my gosh, that is filled with people that will help you with so much when it comes to writing. And I took a lot of classes at the Guppies and met a lot of wonderful people. And I'm still a member of both.
Yes. And if you do go to a conference, the Guppies always have meetups at conferences and tend to wear boas so that they can identify each other. And
Yes.
Again, it's just finding your community is
That's right.
critical.
That's true.
And even if you're just talking to people online, when you do get to see each other in person, you already know them. I mean, it's such a wonderful thing to sort of have that experience.
Right. You are absolutely right about that. I have loved being part of both of those chapters. I think my day of being some kind of a person in charge at the Guppies is over because that's kind of in my past now, but I did learn a lot about that or through that. So, I've done a lot of volunteer kinds of things, but that's who I am. When I worked for the Arts Center last year, I did it as a volunteer. I didn't take pay because we were worried about our grants being cut back. Yeah. So we saved a lot of money because I did that. And I'm not trying to beat my own drum, but what I'm saying is, it's so hard these days to find volunteers. People are just so busy and they just don't want to do it. So there's something in my DNA that's about that.
Well, and the arts rely so heavily on volunteers, and you're pointing out the fact that funding's been cut and everything else. It's a model that relies on that. So we need to talk about that, right? Because it's
that is true.
Not sustainable. I can talk a lot about that. I used to work in theater, and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, it's really hard. And people should get paid. Writers should get paid. Artists should get paid.
Absolutely.
The way things go.
Yeah.
So I love that you're at this point in your life, and you're not stopping. You're going to keep moving forward. Is there project that is waking you up at once in a while, or is there characters coming in sometimes and, tapping you on the head and saying, Susan?
Yes, you need to talk about me this time. One of the things that I'm thinking about well, besides, I'm revising this book about teaching, and I'm hoping to have that done sometime in February. I'm starting to think about my detective, T.J. Sweeney. Now, I never set out to write procedurals. That's really not who I am. But I wrote a novella about her called The Locket, and it's about one of her cases. And Grace, my main character, only makes a brief, what do you call it, a cameo appearance in that book. But T.J. Sweeney is the main character of that book, and my readers are really kind of interested in her because she is such an unusual character. First of all, she's biracial. She lives in a small town. She grew up feeling a great deal of prejudice. She met Grace when Grace moved her into her honors class in high school, kicking and screaming. And she went off to college thinking she'd be an English major, and she turned out to go into law enforcement. And from then on, it was also a really tough thing for her to move up in law enforcement in a small, mostly white town. But she did. She got to be the lead detective, and The Locket is a story that's so dear to my heart because it goes back to World War II. My dad was in World War II. And in our town, Galesburg, Illinois, there's still today a building called the Weinberg Arcade. On the rooftop, they had dancing all through World War II in the late 30s and 40s. And those big bands would come through town, and my parents went there. So I set a cold case. There was a murder that happened to somebody that went there. And the body is found in the present day, and T.J. Sweeney has to figure out who this is and what happened. And there weren't databases back then. There's no fingerprints. So how she's going to do that is a big question. So that was the story of The Locket. And I interviewed a lady that went to the rooftop dances who's still alive, going strong. And that was so much fun. And so now I'm thinking maybe I should write a second novella about a case of T.J. Sweeney's and slap those together and put them out in a paperback. You know, an 82-page novella is too short to publish as a novel with, say, Amazon or Kindle. So, but if I had a second story, I could put them together, or maybe even a third. So I'm starting to think about that. It's just kind of come into my head because now I'll have some time to do that.
Well, and the novella length is, as you said, people need to, you need to have 2 or 3 in order for it to be book length and publishing and all that. But the novella is, 30 to 45,000 words, maybe, a little bit less, but it's a lovely, doable, you can,
Right.
it's a wonderful length. And I know a lot of writers who love writing novellas because they don't have to fill out with the subplots and do this and do that. They can just tell the story they want to tell.
It's a pretty straightforward story with something like that. So that was, every time I write something, I try to challenge myself to do something different. And, after my first Endurance Mystery, the second one has a double plot. One of the plots is back in the 1800s. So I could go back and see what endurance was like back then. And then there's a separate plot in the current day. So that was a real change. Then I wrote a novella, and that was a total change. So I keep trying to do things that will stay fresh and that will teach me how to do something that's different than what I just did.
Well, and this is how we started. You don't make it easy on yourself. I mean, just because it's like, okay, so I figured this out. Now let me write dual timelines. Now let me make a character, the point of view, and write just her story. And I think that's actually kind of great.
Well, it's fun to bring a character to the front that was earlier in the back.
Yeah.
That's what I did when I brought Jeff Maitland up to the front to be Grace's husband. He's been in the other books, but not as much as he is in this new one. So,
yeah. Well, it sounds awesome. So, as we're winding up, we've talked about things, we've talked about publishing. You've been doing this for 16 years. As we're winding up, what do you wish you'd known at the beginning of your career?
I wish I had known more about the business side of publishing. I mean, I have discovered that it's easy to write a book, much harder to get it published or to get it out there to people. I can sell pretty well in the region that I live in, but we only have an indie bookstore. Other bookstores are at least an hour and a half away. Chicago's another 4 hours, and they're not interested in me because I'm not selling millions of copies,
Mm-hmm.
So trying to get my book out there and thinking about the business side of it, that's more difficult for me than actually writing the book. I wish I had known more when I began about that.
And, Sisters in Crime, Guppies, there are ways you can learn about the business.
Yes, that's true.
We've got a business of book survey where we're getting ready to send out for 2025 data that talks about things like numbers, because I also think it's very helpful for people to adjust their expectations.
Oh, that's true.
And not to discourage people, but to say realistically, it's not going to let you retire. Most people, some people it does. The pleasure is going to come from within in a lot of ways.
That's true.
Right?
You're right.
You got to figure out how to market. You got to sell it. You got to do all the stuff. But the fulfillment has to come from the writing.
It does.
Yeah. And what would you say to encourage people to do this? I mean, I'm inspired by the fact you've talked about you're turning 80 and you're like, okay, and I got books to write and things to do. And, there's a vivaciousness to you that I think comes from the creativity.
It does. You're right. And I would say for people starting out, I would say probably the biggest word would be perseverance. When I started and I wrote my first book, I sent out letters to 80 agents. I sent 10 a week for 8 weeks. None of them were interested. Not one was interested. And I thought, okay, well, that's not going to work. So that's one door that's closed. So what can I do next? Mm-hmm. And that's when I decided, well, I'll self-publish, or no, I'll try to get into a publisher myself that doesn't require an agent. And that's what I did with 5 Star.
Mm-hmm. So
you just have to persevere. You have to keep working at it. If one door closes, you got to find another one.
Yeah.
And the good thing about it is that there are a lot of people that are willing to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I would strongly suggest that certainly Sisters in Crime is one of those places where they get a lot of help and a lot of encouragement. Because at the beginning, it takes a lot of encouragement, I think.
Yeah. Yes.
It didn't occur to me that agents were interested in somebody that had never written a book before.
It's a journey, but it's a great journey. And Susan, thank you for your service to Sisters in Crime and to the Guppies. And thanks for being on the podcast. This has been a great conversation.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you. I had connections with you at various times when I was president of the Guppies, but I never actually met you in person. So this has been very pleasant, and I'm so glad that I didn't make you mad at any point.
No, far from it. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Sisters in Crime is about community. We were founded to advocate for women crime writers, and we continue that mission by fighting for equity in the crime writing community. Sisters in Crime is an international, inclusive organization for all who write and love crime fiction, mystery, thrillers, and suspense. Join us at sistersInCrime.org and make sure you subscribe to this podcast.